Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Peter B. Lewis Building, and welcome to an evening with Janine Benyus. Ooh, crowd control. Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Peter B. Lewis Building, the home of the Fowler Center for Sustainable Value and the Weatherhead School of Management. Welcome. Thank you. Yay! We're happy that you all made it here. And before we start, I would just like to hand over to Professor Fred Colopy. He's a professor of information systems here at Weatherhead, and he heads up our design initiative. So, Fred, welcome.
Thanks very much. It's an immense privilege. It's an immense privilege and pleasure to welcome you to the Peter B. Lewis Building. I want to point out that a lot of people in Cleveland, a lot of people around the world refer to this as the Frank Gehry Building, and I just want to say on behalf of a $30 million donor that it's the Peter B. Lewis Building, architected by Frank Gehry, his good friend Frank Gehry. We are so pleased and privileged to be able to share this building with you, and in many ways its realization represents for us a great deal about the values that drive the school. And I'm going to just mention a couple of high points in the architecture of the building because I think they're reflective of who we are and how we saw ourselves when the architect and the architect's colleagues were asking us many, many questions about the kind of space that we wanted to reside in. They're mostly small things, but they play out in large symbolic ways. One of them is that the basic structure is a fortress-like four walls around the outside where the buildings, where the offices and study areas and student areas reside. But standing inside are these two massive structures, each standing on a tripod. The construction people referred to these two massive structures as Buddhas, because that's how they looked in early drawings and sculptures, like these big, massive Buddhas. They're freestanding and connected, and they house the major classrooms, and the student experience is at the center of the architecture. When constraints drove a classroom into the lower level, Frank's response was, yeah, we'll do it, but we're going to bring natural light in, and if you get a chance to poke your head in that classroom right here, it's the most extraordinary teaching space I've ever had the opportunity to teach in. It's a circular classroom which puts the boards closer to the students than they are to the faculty, which makes the faculty uncomfortable that there's no place to land and therefore has to move, which puts the students in close contact with one another. The other classrooms are set up to be immediately breakout spaces. And for my way of thinking, one of the nicest little things is that the power centers in the school, which in most business schools are typically where the department chairs are located, were designed to house the administrative staff because they constitute a center of gravity for students and others in the running of a business school. So there's a lot of battery. We need battery. Do we have power at all? Anyway, that I want you to feel comfortable perusing the place and getting a feel for it as a space, and I'm just very happy that we get opportunities like this to bring in people who have a keen appreciation for the intersection of design and management.
Test 1, 2.
Yeah, you got something. That's really all oh, no, there's one other thing there's the reason I'm here. That was all just an aside. The reason I'm here is to say, on behalf of Mohan Reddy, our dean, the faculty, the student body, the alumni, and all of the other staff and people who make this institution what it is, we welcome you, and we welcome you both for the workshop as a whole, and also for this very special night. So welcome.
And now Fred leaves me with this. All right, and one of the greatest things about working in this region is meeting the kind of people that head up the public sector here as well. And I would like to give a big word of thanks to the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission, who has been instrumental in making this evening possible. And not because they were just thinking that, oh, yeah, this is a nice event and we can get some show out of it, but because they're genuinely committed to sustainability and to making that a part of the way that we do things in this region, and a part of the way that we construct everything that's managed and planned. And I would like to, without further ado, give over to Paul Alcinas, the director of the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission. And he's going to introduce Janine Benyus.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Janine, and good evening to everybody. I am, as Janine said, the director of the County Planning Commission, but the plan was that I would have a co-introducer of Janine tonight, and that was Holly Harlan, as many of you know, the founder and president of Entrepreneurs for Sustainability, a local nonprofit. But Holly and Janine have had incredible days, and Holly's a little bit under the weather, so she'll join us tomorrow. So I'm going to proceed without my pal and friend. During this forum and at other times, we have heard about the dire threats to the planet's people, its water, air, and land. We are urged to be stewards of the earth in crisis. We are told that massive positive changes are needed to dramatically alter the trajectory of our common human existence. But, as is often being asked of those who are called to effect transformative change commensurate with the scale of our challenges, a question is more and more being posed to the agents of change. What is your theory of change? Many have been documenting with increasing precision the problems and dysfunctional patterns of the Earth's natural, economic, and social systems. As individuals, we have positive values, are increasingly putting sustainability-based values at the core of our organizational strategies, and we have remarkable individual and organizational capacities. But to make the dramatic changes which are required, we need extraordinary theories of change. Janine Benyus, her Biomimicry Guild co-founder Dana Baumeister, and their colleagues at the Guild and Biomimicry Institute have given us a great gift: an emerging design discipline of biomimicry, a powerful framework and pathway to massive changes which are inspired by the wisdom of nature itself. Janine is known throughout the world for biomimicry, this new discipline which studies nature's best ideas and imitates nature's designs and processes to solve human problems. Biomimicry is a design practice that looks at nature as a model, mentor, and measure, and seeks to understand and apply life's principles, the ways that nature responds to the Earth's operating conditions. But here's the thing. Any one of us as individuals, or even as members of large, capable organizations, cannot bring into being the fundamental changes which are required to address the global scale of, or the ecosystem-wide challenges that we face. But we can have an influence, a meaningful influence, if we, together with others, intervene at a geographical scale which we can affect, be it our neighborhood or the region which we inhabit. In biomimicry, we have not only a potent framework and theory and design process for change, but also a method which recognizes the essential reality that place matters. The community we are in tonight, Greater Cleveland and Northeast Ohio, is a place that has been defined by its prominent role in the industrial era of US and human history. Only a few miles from here, the global petroleum-based economy was started, and in June 1969, 40 years ago, floating debris on the Cuyahoga River caught fire and ignited dramatic changes which have altered the nation's consciousness and created policies and organizations to heal our waters. It is therefore fitting that today, in this place, led by Holly and her team, and at E4S and others, a part of our local sustainability network met with Janine to explore a new partnership opportunity with the Biomimicry Guild to use life's principles as the basis for regional regeneration. So I'm going to say thank you, Janine, and also Barry, wherever Barry is in the audience. Thank you, Barry Patterson. Okay, now, Janine's extensive accomplishments are well known and are chronicled in the forum agenda materials. But not recorded is what many of us often wonder about. What is the formative experience, the wellspring from which extraordinary leaders like Janine become who they are at important times? At a recent conference, Janine told the story of an 11-year-old girl who was growing up in suburban New Jersey and how one summer her entire life was altered. So Janine, would you favor us, as you come to the podium, to describe that story, and which I think everybody in the room is going to find very illustrative of why Janine Benyus is who she is. Thank you very much. Janine Benyus.
I thought you were gonna go through my slides for me. You sort of went ahead, but that's actually where I live now. That's the view from my office window now. That's Montana. And, but the story that Paul is referring to, I think is a really, it's an ordinary story. I think it's a story of a lot of us. This is a group of people who came to a conference about business as an agent of world benefit. And I think if you're interested, if you've got that kind of a passion to do something, if you scratch a person who has that sort of an activist soul, you'll find a version of this story everywhere. So I did not grow up on the edge of the largest contiguous wilderness in the lower 48. I live there now. But I grew up in suburban New Jersey, with 1,000 people per square mile, not 5 people per square mile like I do now. But my parents gave me this incredible gift, or 2 gifts. One, they moved me to a place that I could run out the back door and get into a small micro wilderness. There was a ravine and there was a field beyond the ravine. And the second thing they gave me was freedom, which a lot of kids don't have either. It was basically like, here's your lunch, and we'll ring the bell for you, when the sun is going down. And I've got to keep your meal hot for you because you're out all day long. I had one of those childhoods. And I spent most of my time in this field I called it Sir Morton Romfield. And I was this budding sort of naturalist, and I pressed all the plants, and I knew where all the cocoons were, and I knew when they were going to turn into butterflies, and I knew where the field mice lived, and I knew the place as a community, as a neighborhood full of living beings. And I literally would go there every day with my field guides and explore more and more and more, and it was the education of a naturalist. And then one day I went, and I remember running into the field, and all of a sudden I was shocked. There were these orange flags on little metal stakes everywhere I looked. And if I had flown over it, I would have seen the outline of phase 2 of our subdivision. And so I sort of backed away, you know, and I got into the bushes, into the edges of that field. And that whole summer, I watched as these bulldozers came and just scraped the meadow away. I mean, just rolled it up and scraped it away and put down asphalt and houses. And I thought to myself then that if the people who were doing this, the men who were doing this, because I listened to them and they, you know, they seemed like good guys, you know, and I thought if they knew what I know about this community, if they had known that they would have settled this landscape differently. And so my work has been about both helping people to see the amazement that is this guy, and also to combine that with the redesign of everything. Because it's really not the wilderness areas that we have to manage. It's the settled areas that we have to learn to design in a way that we're a welcome species, which I'll talk about tonight. William Butler Yeats said that the world is full of magic things, patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharper. And our senses are very, very sharp right now. I mean, I really love the storm we are weathering right now. Every certainty we have has been challenged. And it's a calamitous time and a disorienting time, and I love that. You know, it's tears of surprise that wash the scales out of your eyes. And when certainties crumble, so does arrogance, right? When everything you've ever believed about any economic model or the way that things should be or must be, when those certainties are challenged, is the best time to talk about what is illusionary and compare it with that which is real. And so tonight I want to talk about the real world. I want to talk about the fact that in a place like this, very recently, and in a place like this pretty recently, while we were bailing out and shoring up broken promises, there was one promise that was kept, and it's kept every year. I want to talk about spring. I want to talk about something that we take for granted. You talk about agent of world benefit. You talk about the intersection between design and management. I want to give you a challenge. Design spring. Who was giving these organisms a 30% tax rebate for doing the right thing? I mean, right? I mean, when you think about the orchestration of, and if you haven't done this for a while, I suggest you do. The orchestration of what is going on in the systems all around us is astounding, right? Spring at my place is, it is bursting with life, literally. We're lucky enough to live in between two ponds, two 1-acre ponds, and literally the bird life. I mean, everybody is strutting and they're flirting and they're, you know, they got their best things going, and you know, the pheasants are like, where are my hens? Where are my hens? 1, 2, 3, and the hens are like, I'm not sure. I see another cock over there I might be more interested in. And I mean, it is the most amazing XXX feature. It is. It literally is. Because in the natural world, the priorities are very clear, and they have to do with the continuity of life. And, you know, we're having our house remodeled, and I literally, before I came here, because we live near ponds, we have a lot of swallows, thank goodness. And they fly, they'll fly up to 200 miles an hour, and they mate on the wing. And there was a guy, the contractor, my builder, was standing there, and I was standing here, we were this close together. And 2 swallows came flying between us and had to bank to get between. And we looked at each other and I said, put your hard hat on. It is serious here. Life, it's spring. It's spring. Life has its agenda, right? And if you don't think that building is going on and energy generation is going on and capture and storage and water purification is going on and chemistry is going on, right? I mean, these are high-tech manufacturing zones out there. And yet, it's fragrant, and the sounds are like a lullaby. Design spring, Design this. I mean, design something that works as well as this. I'm not talking about literal mimicry of putting some fern things on the wall. I'm talking about the way it works, because biomimicry is about mimicking how life functions. And one of the ways that life functions is really surprising to the scientific community. These days, I went to school for forestry, and we learned about the forest as a place that was red in tooth and claw, and all these trees are like fighting, competing with everything they've got, right? We saw it very much in the eyes of our own economic system because we were taught that that was real. And so science is really influenced by this. Think of social Darwinism. Now, there's a second look at some of these complex systems. And what scientists are beginning to realize is that mutualistic beneficial relationships which benefit both parties, when you look at it from a cost-benefit analysis, it just makes more sense. If you're going to be together in the same place for a long period of time, you might as well mutually benefit each other rather than do head-to-head competition for your entire life. If you're species A and species B, you might as well find a way to cooperate. And they do. And it's not just that they're cooperating with one another. There's something very interesting going on. And I'm being very anthropomorphic to say that it looks like generosity. But let me give you some examples. So if you think that business as an agent of world benefit is something that we're looking at just in business, think about how the most successful systems work. The apple tree in my backyard is blooming like crazy and the bees are pollinating it. Now, I will take some darn good pies out of that tree. And those are apples that bee doesn't, that bee is pollinating, gets nectar, pollinates, but it's not saying to itself, you know what, I'll only pollinate the flowers that are going to turn into seed so that I can have another tree that has nectar, right? The system that the bee works in, the bee pollinates everyone's apples. Thank goodness this is the swallows that we have. Thank goodness that the swallows and the nightjars and the bats eat everyone's mosquitoes, mine included. Interestingly, from a design standpoint, since I live in between 2 big ponds, often thought that I'd be carried away by mosquitoes, and it's quite the opposite. My rancher, I live in a ranching community, the rancher down the road from me put in a road, and as an environmentalist, I was all upset because he cut this road bank and he didn't vegetate it, and I thought, oh my goodness. And then the next year, the small sandbank was riddled with holes, the homes of swallows. Those are the pest control. There is no need for a chemical pest control because there is these guys, and there is a place for them to live. And to think about that as a design, that you would create a design that was a generous design that gave other species a place to live so that the ecosystem service of pest control would come for free to you. It's an interesting way to think, but it seems to be the way these systems work. Get this one. In the Amazon, the Berkeley climate scientists figured this one out. They looked at the climate maps, global climate change, and they, during the IPCC work, I'm sorry, I didn't set this little thing. And what they found was that during the dry season in the Amazon, when the trees were not transpiring, they weren't giving up moisture, or they shouldn't be because it was dry, and they would be out of water at that point, or it would be very low water. They would shut that down. Instead, there was plenty of water vapor. There were plenty of clouds. It's called our weather. And what they found out was something called hydraulic redistribution was going on. And what it was that in a rainforest, you always think of the rainforest as being shallow-rooted species. But there are a few shrubs that are deep-rooted. And these shrubs, during the rainy season, they put water into reverse. They take water in and they push it out from their roots into the soil bank. 10% of all rainfall is redistributed. Now, of course, those shrubs take in that water, but so do the other trees that are around. Here's another one. We're doing some work. Oh, this is in California, in redwood forests. Redwood forests are in fog a lot, and they have very small needles, and many, many of them. And those needles will capture enough fog on their surface that a large redwood in a single night can create can gather the equivalent of 4 inches of rain. What are our buildings doing that match that, right? I mean, think about it. Here's another one in India where we're working with HOK architects. We meaning, I'm sorry, Biomimicry Guild. It's a consulting firm that we have. And HOK architects were working on Lavasa, which is a 10,000-acre development. And one of the things that we realized is that the moist deciduous forest that would be there if we weren't there has a very particular role, again, with climate. Rainwater comes in, and it's during the monsoon, and some of that rainwater during the rainfall, some of that rainwater is being transpired back into the cloud, and it's sort of like the trees are pushing up a ball in a volleyball game. You know, they're pushing water back up into the cloud. And there's, as wind goes across their surfaces, the surface of their canopy, because of the structure of the trees, the way the canopy is structured, it creates a turbulent flow that picks that up and raises it high enough up that it gets hit by the stream of air going, and it pushes the monsoon inland. If you cut those trees down, that ecosystem service of sort of pushing up that cloud goes away. Now, my question is, what do we do to help move the monsoon inland? Here's a very interesting one, has to do with mutualism. In a review of mutualisms, Mark Hayes at Georgia Tech took another look at coral reefs. And there are 2 fish, they're 2 different species, and they feed on the same eelgrass. And in our current thinking, or our past thinking, we would think, well, they should probably separate away from one another because they're competing over the same food source. But instead, they hang out together, side by side. And when he looked at it closer, what he realized was what all biology always comes down to this. These 2 fish are pooping. Excrement is big in the biological world. These 2 fish are pooping, and because it's their excrement is fertilizing the eelgrass bed. So whereas we think of, there's 2 of us competing, let's divvy up the pie, nature makes more pie. Very, very interesting way to think about your competitor. Generous act number 7. There's another set of studies called carbon allocation studies. It turns out that in a forest, we're now able to radio tag carbon molecules. Now, CO2 is fixed by a tree. So in the upper canopy of a tree that's sitting in full sunlight, CO2 is fixed, and you're able to follow that carbon molecule and see where it goes. Now, in the way I was trained, that tree would hold on to that carbon molecule. I mean, it's sugars, starches. It turns that CO2 into sugars and starches and cellulose. Hold on to it. Maybe it would give a little to its offspring, right? Its kin, right? No. Turns out what's going on is that CO2, that carbon molecule has been found a half an acre away in a tree that's not kin, in a tree that's not even the same species, in a shrub, for goodness sakes. Carbon's being allocated. There's now water allocation studies that in one dry part of a cloud forest, in a drier part in the trade winds of islands, tropical islands, water you're able to track that, and water is being moved. Now, we don't know how that's being done. Think maybe that there's fungal threads that graft the roots together, because under the ground, all roots are intertwined together. And they may be passing it. We don't know. What we do know is that there seems to be a system-wide distribution of very, very precious resources. You think about the beaver. People say to me, you know, the beaver, what do you think of beavers? They're so destructive. And they're like us. You know, when you think about it, there's a whole field of science called niche creation and niche construction. And a niche is a job in the ecosystem and also a place to live. It's kind of a mixture of those two things. And what the beaver does is it cuts down trees and it creates a lot of niches for pond organisms, you know, but people say, well, what about, you know, isn't that destructive? Isn't that the way we are? And I say, yes, we are definitely a niche creator. The question is, and we're going to have an impact. The question is, what kind of impact will we have? Now, studies that have looked at beavers, if you pull up from North America and you look down at North America, and any shovelful of really good silt in North America probably had a beaver involved in it. And when you look at a watershed scale, beavers create more diversity over time in a watershed than without them, because their ponds don't last forever. You know, the dams usually break down eventually, and that pond once again becomes a meadow and then becomes a forest, and there's another patch of opening and another patch of opening. So the question is, are we creating diversity for all life? More diversity as a result of us being here? With any, biomimicry is an innovation tool. Oh, how can I stop this from happening? Does anybody know? It's really annoying. I'll try it over here. Biomimicry is an innovation tool. And with any innovation tool, or with any design methodology that you have, the question that's really fair to ask is, what's worth doing with it? Has anybody seen this graphic? Dr. Adam Neiman, have you seen this? This is pretty telling. This is all the fresh water on Earth, no, excuse me, all the water on Earth, fresh, salt, ice, rivers, all water on Earth, the volume of all water in relationship to the volume of the Earth. And the other one is all the atmosphere that we can live in, that all life can live in relationship to the volume of the Earth. That's it. And inside those two balls, life over 3.8 billion years has taken what was pretty hostile sea and rock planet and created a very lush place to live, has made of this place an Eden, right? Now we're in there as well. We're a very, very, very young species. 200,000 years we've been here. And the rest of life's been here 3.8 billion years. So think of, now that we know billions because of the stimulus package, 200,000 in your bank account versus 3.8 billion. Big difference, right? Well, we've been here a very, very short period of time. So we're the youngster. And biomimicry is about asking the elders. And one of the things the elders, the ones who have lived here and who have made of this place a lush and livable spot, together they're telling us that they have created a system that filters air, a system that filters water, cleans water, a system that builds soil, a system that pollinates next year's spring. They've created conditions conducive to life. Now, if that isn't a design challenge, I don't know what is. Create conditions conducive to life. Can you do this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Testing 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. I'm sorry.
Okay, we'll try this one.
You're wired.
I'm really good with animals. But, and insects don't bother me. But, okay. I think in any conference where you're talking about being an agent of world benefit, and in any conference that's happening now in our historical time, it is no time right now to dream small. I mean, now, while everybody's listening and going, well, maybe that trickle-down economics, maybe it doesn't, maybe it's not gospel. Any time that where all the niches in the ecosystem are open, meaning mentally, the mental models are up for grabs now. Now is the time to paint the vision you really, really want to see. And to paint it as large and as inviting as you can possibly make it. So in the interest of setting a high bar, there's something that we're working on at Biomimicry Guild. We've got this consulting firm of biologists who sit at the design table with various companies, one of which is HOK Architects, who at the planning department plan these very large, city for 2 million in India, 10,000 acres here. I mean, it's a these large projects. Very important to get those right. And what we're instituting there is something called ecological performance standards. And what we're saying is this. We're saying that, and I don't know if you've seen this is called the Manhattan Project, where they went back and they looked at the ecology from 1609, and that's what Manhattan was. Now, I'm interested in these kinds of, in this, because if we were not in a place, what would that native ecosystem be? And even more importantly, what would that native ecosystem be doing in terms of ecosystem services? How much soil would it be creating each year? How much carbon would it be fixing? With every storm, how many gallons of water would it be absorbing and then slowly releasing? How much cooling would it be doing to the air? How much purification of water would be going on? Well, it turns out that long-term ecological research projects ask exactly those questions, and those metrics are in the biological literature. So what we're doing with HOK is saying when they go into a place to develop it, we look up the ecosystem performance metrics of the ecosystem that would be there, and we say, building development project, match this. And they say, and most people would say, oh, well, we'll have to plant a few more trees. Buildings, hardscapes, softscapes, and green spaces all together. Can you match in 20 years, in Lhasa, for instance, what a moist deciduous forest would be doing for this area? You know, there's this life cycle. that we're in as a species. And I think we're at a we've been toddlers with matches. But it is time that we moved out of the house and stopped, holding onto our mother's skirt and asking Mother Earth to do everything for us. And it's like now we're teenagers and we're realizing, wow, we're in our own home. What can we do? And we have this period where we've been sort of saying to ourselves, let's at least meet our own needs, right? Let's have, no net energy buildings or no net water buildings. That's great. Meeting our own needs is great. The next step in our life cycle is that of generosity, that of giving back, that of being citizen. Generosity is a grandparent's trait. We've got a big maturity curve ahead of us if we are to live here and be a welcome species. The difference between an invasive species and a naturalized species, a species that comes from somewhere else but is not invasive, is that the naturalized species gives something of value back to the system. So this is our goal. Our cities and our buildings projects will match the level of ecosystem services provided by the native ecosystem. And it's metrics-based. Frankly, I think our goals, the things we set for ourselves, have to be this high in everything. This is showing you, we look at literally how much of the rainfall ends up in the soil and the vegetation. The thing about biomimicry is that it is science-based. And for that reason, the arguments sort of sputter to a stop in the sense that, this is what the system is doing. And with all the energy we're pouring into a city, can we do that as well? So then the question becomes, once you've set your goals, how are you going to achieve those goals? And again, I would say that looking to some of the technologies that organisms have already developed is a really good place to go. And that's what biomimicry is about. This is Autumn Keller. He studies geckos. And instead of thinking to ourselves, let's design a glue that's less toxic, perhaps we should be saying, how does nature adhere? Turns out geckos don't use glue. They use a small intermolecular force called van der Waals forces. They have split ends on the edges of their toe pads, and those split ends, those little fibers, adhere to the wall, and then are able to be reversibly removed. Incredibly strong. You could hang about 280 pounds from a gecko. I wish I had known that when I was little. It could have been one of the things that I entertained my mother with. My poor mother. There are a lot of people mimicking the gecko work, and there's actually somebody here in northeastern Ohio that I met today that's doing gecko work. They're actually doing carbon nanotubes to make a tape that works like the gecko. It's actually 200 times better stronger, but the idea came from the gecko. In fact, there are many, many Nature's Apprentices out there. I've been following this story since 1990. And there literally are thousands of labs. What's happening now, though, instead of just being in academic labs, it's now in industry labs. So that's what happened about 10 years ago. Industry started to call, and I had written this book, and they called and said, hey, can you bring a biologist down? And we want to do biomimicry in real time. We're inventing. Can you get here Monday morning? And so 10 years later, Barry and Dana Baumeister and I started this company, and Barry's here, and these are some of the companies that we work with right now. So this is biomimicry as an innovation tool, looking to the natural world for innovation, for practical problem solving. It is really in some rather mainstream R&D labs. We do this thing called amoeba through zebra reports. And what that is we have the best job in the world if you're a nature nerd. Bar none, the best job in the world, because a company will come to us and say, how does nature insulate? And we say, we'll get back to you. We go into the biological literature, and we filter feed through the literature, and we go all across the taxa, bacteria, fungi, birds. How do they all insulate? And then we come up with mechanisms or strategies and provide our clients with these strategies, and then they try to mimic them. According to studies, 88% of the time, there's something that you will not find in the human patent database. There's only a 12% overlap, according to studies of the patent database and biological technologies, where there's an overlap, where the same problem set we solve in the same way that the rest of nature solves. 88% of the time it's new. It's really, really quite fun. It's a fun job. But again, what's worth doing? I think the big task is that right now, this is what can be done. We've proven that. This is what can be pretty good for toddlers, I'd say. This is what can be done. I mean, it's pretty impressive until you look pretty closely. That's what is done. And what separates them is how they function. The one on the right functions really, really well from the bottom up, and it functions as a system. And I think that the task of biomimicry, the large task, is to reimagine everything so that this may not look like that, but that it'll function like that. So it's moving from what Paul Hawken and Amory Lovins called the take, make, and waste culture to the retake, remake, and return culture. I'm going to talk about 4 categories in which there are biomimetic inventing going on. There are many. But let's just look at the way we make things. How do we make things? Let's rewrite the story. Have you guys seen The Story of Stuff by Annie Leonard on the web? Let's rewrite it. Let's rewrite it. First, how does life source raw materials? This is a kind of interesting one. I'm going to move quickly through these. This is a company called, and in the right, there's the company, or the lab that's working on it. Cholera is borrowing a recipe. This is a green chemistry one. Borrowing a recipe from coral reefs to take CO2 and turn it into concrete. What happens in a coral reef or in mollusks, the seashells? Seashells are CO2 combined with calcium and carbonate and seawater to make a ceramic, to make calcium carbonate, which is limestone. Interestingly, when we make cement, we get in a truck and we go to a cliff of old seashell bodies, and we dig them up. It's like, thank you, mollusks, for taking that CO2 and making it into limestone for me. We dig it up, we grind it into fine-grade limestone, and then we go to the concrete or cement factory, biggest building material in the world now, and 6 to 8% of our CO2 emissions, by the way, bring it to the cement factory and make it into cement. In the meantime, we're like, what are we going to do with all that CO2 that's going out the smokestack? Well, imagine this. Again, aspirational goal. Imagine taking the CO2 out of the smokestack, bubbling it through seawater with the same recipe that the coral reef uses, and winding up with tons of powdered limestone to use to make your concrete. What if we start thinking about CO2 as a building material? There are many organisms that use CO2 as a building material. Anything green uses CO2. You breathe out, it uses CO2. When you hug a tree, you're hugging air. It's CO2 turned into stuff, turned into long-chain polymers. Novomer is a company, Jeff Coates is a chemist who studied a leaf, came up with a catalyst to take CO2. He also uses the waste from limonene from citrus processing. And he makes biodegradable plastics. Look for them. Unilever just invested in them. Look for them in Unilever's packaging to come. Imagine getting CO2 sequestration credits in your packaging. We really have to think about where we get stuff, the story of stuff. And where we get stuff now, most of the plastics that you're sitting on or the carpeting that you walk on, it's made of oil, literally made of oil, and it comes from this wellhead. But what's happening increasingly, I watch happening, is this move towards, instead of a hydrocarbon-based economy based on oil, we're moving to a carbohydrate-based economy. So you know when you have biostarches, when you have the utensils made of potato starch and corn starch, and we're burning biofuels, that's carbohydrates that we're burning. Increasingly, though, we're asking soil, farms, to be the source of our carbon for that stuff. So the new wellhead is the soil root tip. And the new fossil fuel is not oil, but soil fertility. If we're going to the farmer's field to get our stuff and to get our fuel, we have to get really, really good at agriculture. Really good. Like now, we should leave now. Let's just go get good at agriculture. And there's a lot of people working on this, including the Land Institute, looking at ecosystem models for how to do agriculture based on a prairie, for instance, in the plains part of the world, or based on a three-story tropical forest in other parts of the world. An agriculture that sponsors its own fertility, is perennial, holds down the soil, doesn't need pesticides because it's diverse rather than a monoculture. Very, very different models. So once we get the raw material, how do we manufacture? Does anybody know what this is? People say, oh, it's an anemone. Anybody know what it is? Yeah, those are the spinnerets. That's the business end of a spider. And those are spinnerets, and it's color enhanced, but that's the silk coming out of the spinneret. 6 different kinds of silk. Now you think about that. You think about that manufacturing. Think about that versus going to a fiber manufacturing plant where you put on the, you put on the eye guards and the ear guards and the hard hat, right? This is flies and crickets come in at one end, chemistry and water, very small amounts of pressure to create this fiber. And you're like, well, it's spider silk. I mean, I can break spider silk. Well, if spider silk was in a silk that was as big as a pencil in diameter, the diameter of a pencil, it would stop a 747 in flight. It's 5 times stronger ounce for ounce than steel. So some of these materials, it's a matter of scale. Some of these materials are the envy of material scientists. And I've actually met somebody here in Northeast Ohio who is working on spider silk and the processing. How does the spider, what's most interesting to me is room temperature manufacture, body-friendly manufacture, right? How do we do that? I mean, because what material scientists do is heat, beat, and treat. That's what they call it. They heat it up, high pressure, and chemicals. It's called, they'll say to each other, hey, what's the heat, beat, and treat on your new material? Because that's the way it's always been done in the last, 150 years. But in the real world, this caribou is making unbelievable ceramic, tough ceramic, in about 2 weeks, out of like some grasses that he's eating. This abalone, this is the picture of an abalone, the inside of abalone nacre self-assembling out of seawater. Again, it's one of these chemistries. It self-assembles and into this beautiful, incredible layered structure that is mineral, chalk. It's very interesting because it's not very tough. It's 3 times tougher than chalk would be normally because it has polymer in between. It's twice as tough as our high-tech ceramics that in the jet engine that I flew here in. That's how tough abalone is. So everybody's crawling all over themselves to figure out how to make ceramics. But imagine not needing a kiln. Imagine it self-assembling out of water. And when you hear about self-assembly, that's what this is, that you put the precursors of a material into a beaker of water, and they have an affinity for one another, and they fall to a solution, in a sense. In solution, they fall to a solution, and they layer up. It's sort of like when you have oil and water in a cruet, and you let it sit, and it layers up, that's self-assembly, too. Only this is self-assembly to actually make 3-dimensional products. And there's lots of people working on this. I could have had a big et cetera here. This is silica. This is a diatom. And that's a sea sponge. And these are forms of silica. And so it's called biosilification. They're looking at making computer chips with the intricacy of this diatom, but they're doing it in low temperature processing. And that's happening in a lot of places as well. It's in the lab stage at this point. But Lucent Technology is really interested. Those filaments at the base of that sea sponge are as good as our fiber optics, only you can tie them in a knot. That's an interesting kind of glass. Now, the reason you can tie them in a knot is because they have a small amount of polymer in them. And if you fired it in a kiln, you would burn that away. So when you take away the fossil fuel burning, you get some very interesting qualities. Life does all that it does, including you and I, with 5 polymers. Polymers are just long chains. We think of them as plastics, long chain molecules. 5 polymers to make everything. We have about 350 polymers. Because every time we want to do something functionally, we make a new polymer. What life does is says, keratin. Keratin's very interesting. I'll use it for my hair. I'll use it for my rhino's horn. I'll use it for my feathers. And if I want color for my feathers, I'll put some structure into the keratin, and I'll create the color blue to your eye. So instead of using a new polymer to make the color blue, it simply rearranges or adds design to matter. We have to learn how to design common, abundant, local raw materials in new ways. Because when you only have 5 polymers, guess what happens? They're easy to recycle. You don't need a number on the bottle. I gotta move. Energy, there's lots of stuff going on in energy, but one of the most exciting things, I think, is the artificial photosynthesis work. Photosynthesis, a leaf, an amazing thing, because it's taking in sunlight a drizzle of photons. Out of every 100 photons, it turns 97 of them into fuel. We're taking in sun and making electricity, and then we do a chemical process to make fuel. So the big holy grail is to go from sunlight right to fuel, using CO2 as a raw material, because that's what the plant does. CO2 is the raw material that it uses the sun's energy to take that CO2 and make it into stuff, fuel, ATP, and eventually sugars and starches and cellulose. So how does life gather it? First of all, this is the first product out of artificial photosynthesis work. A company called Dysol. A lot of companies are getting into this space. In fact, Paul Hawken and I have a venture group now, Biomimicry Ventures, and we are working on, in this space of self-assembling solar cells that are incredibly inexpensive, made with non-toxic substances, self-assembled, and based on how a leaf works. The next step is to figure out how to split water like a leaf does, so that you bubble off oxygen, you can bubble off hydrogen protons, you have electrons that are released in order to do the CO2 to fuel, and there's a lot of people working on this work as well. Now, other ways of gathering energy, there's wave harvesters that are based, this is an Australian firm called Biopower, and it's based on kelp and how kelp move in the ocean. And this is constantly in motion, this biowave, and an array of them are generating energy. This is an interesting one. What can a humpback whale teach a wind turbine? Humpback whale is usually not in the air like that. Usually it's in the water. And it is a ballet dancer in the water. When humpback whales do bubble feeding, where they go into a spiral like this, they dive down into the water, they come up and they describe this Fibonacci sequence spiral, the whole time blowing bubbles. That curtain of bubbles surrounds fish, a column of fish. And then all their friends come, and this is amazing if you can ever see this in the wild. I haven't. But you'll have like 5, 8, 10 humpback whales going down and then coming up through the column with their mouths open, and just taking all those fish, right? That's a lot of maneuvering. And the thing that allows them to maneuver is their fins. They've got scalloped edges on the fins. And those scalloped edges, it turns out, there's a guy named, believe it or not, here's the scientist. The scientist's name is Frank Fish. But this is a mammal, but Frank E. Fish. His middle initial is E, and he uses it in his scientific, so it's Frank E. Fish. But he's overturned our way of thinking about turbulence. It turns out that those scalloped edges play with turbulence in such a way that if you put them on an airplane wing, in wind tunnel tests on an airplane wing, 32% reduction in drag. 32%. Do you know what Boeing could do with a 32% reduction in drag and a 6% increase in lift? So the first company, and Frank's a part of this, that's coming out of this is a company called Whale Power. They're making wind turbine blades, and the wind turbines rotate in very slow wind speeds because of the improvement in lift. We have to learn how to participate in the water cycle. And pooping in our water is not a really good way to do that. You know, seriously, there's some things that we do in water that we're going to look back on and go, boy, were we toddlers, you know? The things we do in water, the things we do to water, we are missing, in fact, one of the major ways to gather water. There's a lot of water in air. We don't think about it except when we're very, very humid. And we rush into our air-conditioned buildings, and our air-conditioned buildings are working so hard and using so much energy to cool wet air. What if we took that high humidity air or those cloud banks of fog and actually learned to gather that water? There's an organism called the Namibian Beetle that lives in the Namib Desert, has no groundwater, but gets a vective fog, and it climbs up to a dune, puts up its rear end up in the air, and on its wing scales, there are these little bumps. And the bumps are beautifully designed. The tips are water-loving, and the sides are water-shedding. The fog comes along, and it builds up a little ball on the magnet, like a magnet onto this tip. And then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it rolls off right into the critter's mouth. So it lifts up its wing scales, and in a few seconds, there's a stream of water running. Now imagine wrapping, and people are making mimics of this, hydrophobic and hydrophilic squares next to each other on a piece of plastic. It's as simple as that. Imagine wrapping our buildings in this, up at the higher stories in San Francisco, and having water come in and drink this. Have fog water for your coffee, your morning coffee. The way we recover fresh water, because that's how you think about it, if you're a biologist, these organisms are recovering fresh water all the time. You know, all the organisms that live in salt water are drinking fresh water. They need fresh water. They are all desalination plants, every single one of them, except they don't use 900 pounds per square inch of pressure because they're not pushing the solution against a membrane. We push against a membrane and we hold the salt, and then we're like, dang, this is clogging a lot, you know? Right now, in every single one of your red blood cells and many other of your cells, there's an hourglass-shaped pore in the membrane of the cell. Back to high school chemistry, membrane. There's an hourglass-shaped pore. Water molecules literally line up and are escorted with charges and shape and hydrophilic and hydrophobic properties. They're escorted through the pore, and they're actually pulled through the pore in a sense. So it's forward osmosis, not reverse osmosis. Water is pulled forward, leaving everything behind. 100 times better rate of desalination than reverse osmosis. A little company called Aquaporin, you might want to run out and invest in right now, is mimicking that. This whole thing of nanoparticles and nanotechnology, life is nano. Nature was nano before nano was cool, said Henry Wilkins in the New York Times. It's true. Life can teach us a lot about how to do nano safely. Now here's one of the things with nanoparticles. You hear about nanoparticles. It turns out bacteria, sulfate-reducing bacteria, they actually, as part of their biosynthetic process, they create little nanoparticles that float around in the water. But then they also release these proteins. And these proteins aggregate the nanoparticles, and the nanoparticles fall out as an aggregated clump. Nanoparticles are embedded in materials in the natural world. So there's a lot of biosafety protocols I think we can learn from the natural world. Here's another water one. Water flows in a logarithmic spiral, a three-dimensional logarithmic spiral. When you turn on the faucet, that three-dimensional spiral, the spiral of clouds that you see in hurricane swirls, there's a certain geometry. It's a Fibonacci sequence, actually. It is now, for the first time, because of Pax Scientific, and Pax Water, and Pax IT, and Pax Fan, being applied to fan blades. This happens to be a water aerator. This lily is about this big. It runs on 25 watts. You can sit it in a 1,000,000-gallon water distribution tower. And what are those things called? What are those water towers? For a city, municipal water tower. And it will it starts to spin, and then it will circulate that water. Why is that a good thing? Because if you're using chlorine and you have stratified water that's not moving, you have to douse it with chlorine to hit every molecule. But if you can circulate it, you can peel back the chlorine. Anyway, that's the way flow goes. It's also beautiful. It's in the Museum of Modern Art. Once we have the water, let's keep it. There's all kinds of self-healing technologies that are happening now, and one of them I like a lot is a Brinker technology. It's called platelet, and it finds in pipes, it finds the leak, and it's based on how your red blood cells find a leak and seal it. Green chemistry is a huge part of this whole movement. Green chemistry is nature's chemistry. Basically, we've got two chemistry books going on right now, two recipe books. We have industrial chemistry, and we have nature's chemistry. Now, industrial chemistry, this is Terry Collins of Carnegie Mellon taught me this. Nature's chemistry, the difference is that industrial chemistry uses every element in the periodic table because we can. And we use very, very simplistic reactions. A lot of heat, beat, and treat, but very simplistic recipes. We use even the toxic elements of the periodic table. Life does the opposite, the rest of life. Life takes a subset of the periodic table and uses elegant recipes to put it together. Taking nature's recipe book and industry's recipe book and replacing one with the other is what green chemistry is hopefully going to bring to us. Here's a few examples. This is a blue mussel, and it glues itself underwater. Try next time you have a Band-Aid on, putting your hand, doing the dishes. See how long it stays on. There is now, if you buy a hardwood plywood kitchen cabinet in the United States, you will probably be getting a glue that's formaldehyde-free. If it's made at Columbia Forest Products, which is the largest hardwood plywood manufacturer in the country, 4 manufacturing plants, they have mimicked the mussel glue in the resin, and it's formaldehyde-free and it's really good in water. Really, really good in water. This is an interesting one. This is a tardigrade, this guy, and this is a resurrection fern. And this is somebody getting a vaccine. What percentage of all vaccine people who are about to get a vaccine do not get a vaccine? What percentage do you think they fail to get the vaccine that's coming to them? 50. 50%, which is a lot. That's a lot of dead children. 50%. Why? Because a break in the cold chain. The refrigeration breaks down. Instead of figuring out how to put more solar refrigerators out there, this guy, Bruce Rosner of Cambridge Biostability, said, let's try to make a shelf-stable vaccine, a thermally stable vaccine. Now, I can see this being very, very useful for a lot of preservatives. And what this is an organism that if it dries, that's blown up incredibly. This is a very small microscopic organism called a tardigrade. And when it dries out, it can last for hundreds of years before it, when you add water, it springs back. How does it stay preserved, right? Well, it does so with this sugar called trehalose. He's wrapped vaccines in trehalose, it's like a tiny time capsule kind of thing, and put them in inert liquid in a vial, and he can put it in a glove compartment of a doctor's car, and it'll stay for years. That's pretty important work. Paints, pigments, the toxic heavy metals in the streams outside of textile manufacturing firms. You guys know, those of you who are local, know about the bitter tears of our Industrial Revolution. And I do too, living in a hard rock mining state. A lot of it has to do with, some of it has to do with pigments. These organisms, the most brilliant organisms in the natural world, do not use pigmentation to create their color. They use structure. There's no blue or green or yellow or anything in this peacock. It's all brown. What is happening is that it's got layers, and light goes through those layers, and they bounce back, and they create the color to your eye. Now there are fibers that are structural color fibers, absolutely no pigment in them. It's Morphotex by Tijan, both Japanese firms, and Difol by Kuraray. Black is the worst, by the way. Everybody wearing black as a designer color, black's the worst in terms of being really nasty for the water, and Difol it uses structure to create blacks. Here's Qualcomm, who's using it to create low energy displays. It's using structural color to create low energy displays. So there are some large companies that are starting to pick up on biomimicry. Instead of remaking our detergents, why don't we look at how nature cleans? Turns out that nature does not use detergent except for us. This is a property called the lotus effect. The lotus stays very, very clean and pristine. And on its surface, it's got a very nano rough, see that nano surface? It's mountaintops. And that big ball there is a ball of water. It's a ball of rainwater. And the dark things are little dirt particles. Dirt particles teeter on the bumps on the surface of the leaf. Rainwater balls up, and as the leaf tilts, the rainwater picks up, it balls, and it picks up the dirt particles. It's called the lotus effect. You'll see it in building paints. It's available in concrete, in glass, in fabrics. We get brought into a lot of companies to solve technical challenges, which we're very happy to do as long as their sustainability wins. But once we're there, we usually wind up being a biologist in the boardroom. Because very often businesses say, you know, this is interesting. I'd really like to know how to run my whole business like a mature forest. I mean, how is it that these systems, I got thinking about it, they'll come down. I got thinking about it the other night. How is it that they're so sustainable? And could we create the conditions of sustainability in this company? Could the emergent property of this company be sustainability if we followed some of those? Like, I don't know, step into my boardroom and let's see what we can do. It's really interesting. So what has happened is that we've gone from greening products to helping to green companies using life's principles. What life's principles are, we looked around and we synthesized a lot of biological literature looking at general patterns, not of individual organisms, but what is the general, ubiquitous, universal patterns that you see over and over again in the natural world, no matter what kind of an organism it is. And there are things like that, you know, benign manufacturing. They're resilient. A lot of companies want to know about resilience. So we've broken that down, and again, based on science and what we're learning in the scientific literature, what does it mean to be a company that follows life's principles? Very much an eco-design checklist. There are, I mean, I could go on and on with these organisms. They are, every single organism, the 30 to 100 million that are out there, are filled with incredible adaptations. So the question is, if this is the first time you're hearing about this, how do you get involved in biomimicry? One thing I would say, how many people are local to Northeast Ohio? Yay. Okay, there's something going on here. There's this amazing buzz going on. I was all day in a meeting. If you've heard of Entrepreneurs for Sustainability, Paul's involved, Holly Harlan's involved. They have a core networking group that is companies like Moen and BDance and other companies, and government folks, academics. I mean, it's nonprofits, foundations, venture capitalists were there. I mean, it was an amazing group of people, and what they're trying to say is, let's use biomimicry, let's create a biomimetic pipeline, research pipeline, that goes all the way from the academic groups that we have here in the region, all the way up to actually creating applied products and becoming known then for the enterprise of bio-inspired sustainable technologies. Really, really interesting group. So that's going on here. There's a fun, I put the B here because there's this fun company called BDance. The guy, what's his name, Mike? Huh? Doogie? Dugan, Mike Dugan. Mike Dugan was a beekeeper growing up. His family kept bees. And so he knows a lot about them, and he started to do some research into what's called swarm technology. On the software side, so bees and ants are very, very efficient at finding what they need, foraging, and so on. So there's a lot of projects that kind of look at server allocation and trying to make that more efficient by studying how bees find their nectar and tell the rest of the bees where the best nectar is. Well, he's taken 9 principles from the bees, scientific principles from the bees, and he's created a waste brokerage, meaning he is figuring out where the disparate amounts of some people's waste are other people's raw material. He's creating a food web within the region, and he's using the principles of the bees to find the individual waste and bring it to people's attention. It's called Bee Dance. There's all kinds of things going on there. So if you're local, check those folks out. They're also working on creating a biomimicry design center here. That's what we were meeting about. So it'll be a resource for you. Other steps, that's a cuttlefish. They're so cool, reef squid. This display just camouflages itself instantly. Amazing. Invite a biologist to your design table. You can call us at Biomimicry Guild, and we will either help you or find somebody locally who's at your natural history museum, your zoological garden, your botanical garden, the people who know organisms, and the broader their knowledge, the better. Okay, the generalists the naturalists rather than the specialists. Take a workshop in Biomimicry Guild, bring your designers to workshops if you work in a company. We do workshops in places we really want to visit, like Peru and Costa Rica, and we're doing one in South Africa at the end of August. That'll be my first time. We also, in addition to the Guild, we also have an institute. At the Institute, Biomimicry Institute, we do K-12 education. We have a big university program. We've got about 30 professors right now who are teaching biology, taught functionally, to designers, engineers, architects, people in the design disciplines. There's all kinds of biomimetic labs. Doug Page of Cleveland Institute of Art, thank you. Cleveland Institute of Art is doing a biomimetic course with students. They'll be coming up with a project. So create a course at your school. Just contact us at biomimicryinstitute.org for research and education sorts of things. And for corporate things, ask Barry. It's Biomimicry Guild. Visit asknature.org. Okay, we will. I'll show it to you. Asknature.org is, what we realized was that we shouldn't keep all these great ideas to ourselves, and that life's ideas, life's strategies should be spread far and wide, and everyone, regardless of the ability to pay, should have access to them. So we've created a website where you type in a function like filtration of salt out of water, and up comes mangroves, and up comes the sea glands of turtles, and you actually get the information that you're looking for, just the biological functional information you're looking for, and then you meet the scientists who are doing the work. So it's a combination of Google of Nature's Solution and an eHarmony.com for biologists and engineers. Because the social side of this is, I mean, I know as a biologist, I was never invited to designers' parties. I mean, you know, would have, I mean, I wanted to be, because they were so much cooler than we were. On AskNature.org, they are partying together, and they're co-creating bio-inspired products, and that's the idea. Industry, on the flip side, will post challenges here. And the biologists who may know about this can come forth. Autodesk, IDEO did the design of it, and Autodesk did the, is the founding sponsor. We've got about, we've got almost 2,000 strategies up now. In a couple of months, we'll have all 2,000 up. And it's a wiki. It's a collaborative process. We're working with Encyclopedia of Life, Ed Wilson's Encyclopedia of Life. They are creating a web page for every species on Earth. So biologists are contributing to Encyclopedia of Life. And one of the data fields is what can we learn from this organism? So the world's biological network will be giving us functional adaptations that will appear on our site, organized by function. This is moth eyes. Anyway, go check it out. There's this huge taxonomy that has all human endeavor organized by verb. Talk about a nerdish thing to do. Paul asked me to say a little bit about myself early on. And I will end this by telling you why I'm in this work. I mean, I didn't wake up one day and say to myself, I want to be an innovation consultant or I want to help design new products or processes, although it really is fascinating. I wanted people to look at those field mice and the butterflies in that field and feel the same amount of amazement and respect that I did. Right? And my life has turned out to allow me to be able to watch that in people's eyes, because when you look at a leaf and you study about it, that's one thing. When you study it to learn from it, and then you try to emulate it, and you have to get into a deepening conversation with that organism, you have to go back and go, you know, I tried, and could you tell me again? You will never find people who have more respect for their organisms than those who are trying to mimic what it is those organisms do. Now, that is why I'm in this work, because I think it really transforms the way people feel about the rest of the natural world. Respect is a much more powerful emotion than pity, for instance. To make this manifest, we've instituted a Thanksgiving loop. We ask our clients, and we're asking other companies that have bio-inspired products, to donate a percentage of their proceeds to conserve the habitat of the organism that inspired it. It's just good manners. There's the original patent holder, and then there's us with our notebook, you know? They should be on the patent as well. And so this is really exciting. It's called Innovation for Conservation. Finally, the other thing that you find in this work is that whole rhetorical argument about, I'm talking about nature as if it's out there, right? Which is like, we're not nature, right? What you find when you start to say, how do you power yourselves? How do you build? How do you take care of your children? When you start to say that to other organisms, how do you make your materials? The false boundary between us and the rest of the natural world dissolves. And what we realize is that we are biological organisms on this planet, you know, in a long line of organisms that have tried to figure out how to live here in a way that they're welcome, in a way that they contribute. There's a long line of organisms that have tried to naturalize to this place and find their home here. That's what we're up to. And most of the time, I think we feel like this guy, like we're alone, like we're this alien species, right? That somehow all the organisms I showed you are somehow they somehow are better than us in some way. And I don't believe that. I don't believe they're more likely to be sustainable than we are. I'm not going to let us get off the hook that easily. You know, I think that what we have to remember is we have to drop this lonely myth we've had for a long time that we are not nature. We have to remember that we are nature, right? We may be younger than the rest of the natural world, but we're not alone. The one thing that we have with this big brain is that we can choose our mentors. We can choose the models for a whole new way to design everything. We can choose the models for a way to design a give-back economy that is actually as generous as a grandparent, that has joy in giving away. This nest is natural. This building, Mr. Gary, is natural because a biological species made it. Our artifacts, and these artifacts, they're only different by degree. They're different by what it is we ask our artifacts to do. For the robin, the most important thing is that the chicks will fare well and that they'll be healthy and supported. When you put life at the center of your decision making, your artifacts begin to change. When you begin to prioritize in that way. And really, that is what all these organisms and what we could as well do. And when we do, we get to do something that I think all of us deeply, deeply want. I think we all, at the end of a day, want to hear our mom's dinner bell, and we want to go home. And I think we want to stay here. You know, I really, really do. And I think that after all the PowerPoint presentations, I think that this is what we are up to. It's a homecoming. It's for us to learn how to stay here as a welcome species on this planet. And it begins with us growing up and becoming much more generous, becoming agents of world benefit. Thank you very, very much for what you're doing. Guys, it's fabulous. Thank you very much.
All right, we have barely a few minutes for questions, so please come up. The microphone is here.
Hello, thank you for your extraordinary and inspiring talk.
Thank you.
How can we learn more about your Leaf Solar project?
We are sort of in stealth mode. We are hoping to make an announcement in September, and because we're testing and whatnot right now. Yeah, so please stay tuned. And if you guys know Paul Hawken, and he and I will be really excited about it. We're sort of wish we could say more, but we can't right now.
May I ask a next question? The PowerPoint about life principles for business, you flipped through it very fast, and I was like, I want to learn more about it. Could you dive into it a little bit? Is there time?
Sure, and you can download it on the Biomimicry Institute site. Is it on the Institute site? It's called Life's Principles. It's a framework that we started with a list of life's principles that we found in places like there's a book called The Way Life Works And it's written by the guy who unraveled the mysteries behind RNA. And what he tried to do was to sort of simplify, to find universals, which is very rare, actually. In the scientific literature, you're usually trained to find the exception to the rule in order to disprove a theory. But in this case, you're trying to find the generalities. So it started, I made a list, and we gathered a lot of lists from the scientific literature, put them together, and it has evolved over the years to be a tool that we've used as a framework. I mean, the cities that HOK is working on right now, we use that as a framework, meaning you can think of it as a checklist. So in the beginning, we say in the scoping phase of designing anything, we say, let's look at life's principles, and let's keep them in front of us, and let's try to evaluate all of our ideas through life's principles. Is this locally attuned and responsive? Is it cellular and nested? Does it build from the bottom up? Is it diverse in a functional and a response way? I mean, it takes a while to unpack life's principles and to figure them out. We teach whole workshops in this, but once you use it as a tool, what it does is it gives you a way to, during the scoping and during the creation phase, and then during the evaluating phase, which I think is almost as important, to say, what would life do and what wouldn't life do? So you want to evaluate your technologies, you run them through life's principles. It helps move your technologies towards a more systemic sustainability. Not a sustainability that is focused, say, on just energy efficiency, right? Or just reduction in toxins with high energy. It helps you keep the system in mind when you're designing. The whole system is in the room. And it's not a system that human beings made up. It's a system that we see around us. So that's the power of it, I think.
I don't want to make your story less optimistic than it was. Thank you for that. But I question whether in these 3.2 billion years, nature, it's probably not the first time that nature is faced by such a species as we are. Did you find out anything about what nature does with species like that?
This is really true, because we are the laughter you hear is really a lot of self-hatred. It is. It is this feeling that, and it's that feeling that everything we touch turns to soot. And we went from sort of realizing that a lot of what we touch turns to soot to actually believing that no matter what we do, everything we touch turns to soot. I mean, where did we get that black mark on our soul that's irredeemable? When did we become unforgivable as a species? From a biologist standpoint, that's a very emotional thing, really. I mean, that's emotional, it's irrational. Because a biologist says, look, every species wants to adapt. And every species has the capacity to adapt, right? So, are there other species that have poison? Absolutely. I mean, you think about the first species, the first bacteria, when they started to pump oxygen into the air, their byproduct was oxygen. Oxygen became the first poison. But guess what happened? Another species evolved that used oxygen in its process, right? And this is why this is very interesting for us to begin to learn how to use CO2 as a building material rather than pumping it underground, right? 99% of all species that have ever been on Earth are extinct. They're not here anymore. The 1% that we're with right now are the ones that are still here. It's not a foregone conclusion that we will be part of the 1%, but it's also not a foregone conclusion that we will not be part of the 1%. But it's not going to happen tweaking the edges of this paradigm. It's going to happen with deep and radical redesign of everything. Not just what we make, but how we make it, and more importantly, why. I'm rooting for us. You know? I mean, I made that choice.
All right, we have time for 2 more questions. So next 2 people, people that have agreed to meet with David Cooperrider afterwards, just please join him at the steps.
This may unexpectedly segue fairly well from what you just said. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about how, I guess the social biological perspective that essentially we've created all of these systems that we see around us and that we're talking about to deal with the fact that our infants are the most feeble, least viable of almost any infants in nature. And that we've created these systems that maybe have gotten somehow off point. And so that remembering that that's why we've created these things might bring us back closer to our sense of nature. And on that, I hadn't thought of until what you made the comment you did, but I'm reminded that the etymology of the word sin in its original terms, the literal meaning was missing the point.
Wow.
It wasn't
Really?
moralistic, it was missing the point.
Wow.
And that's what we've
As
done.
a lapsed Catholic, I wish I had known that before. I thought it was like Stairway to Hell. I just missed the point. I like that. I think that vulnerability of a lot of species, I don't know that we're the most vulnerable, but I'll tell you what, I think that we've been driven by our fear because we are the naked, quivering ape. And when you think about it, there was a time in our history when we had to say goodbye, family, and walk out of the cave mouth, and there were saber-toothed tigers, right? I mean, it was not a happy place out there, short and brutish. And in order to get out that cave door in the morning, we had to do a lot of denying. So at a certain point in our evolutionary history, denial was a really it was an adaptive trait, right? What's that? So, denial is now very maladaptive. So the signs at the Burger Kings that said global warming is baloney, did you hear about that? On the marquees, they said global warming is, that denial is very maladaptive at this point. But I really do try to come at this through compassion, right? In that, what is it that made us so darn scared, right? That we had to bolster ourselves against the vicissitudes of, and vagaries of a climate that may not give us crops this year. And in the hands of a species that is really sort of worried about the coming unknown, we did everything we could to have it break in our favor. And now we're doing things like, let's genetically modify the plants, and we're still in that mode of really trying to calm our fears. Now, if we took that same biological vulnerability and we're afraid of the right things, think of what we could do. Think of, instead of being afraid that, Clinton slept with an intern, if we were afraid that our tap water tasted really funny. If we tuned into that biological vulnerability and we're afraid of the right things, I think we could channel ourselves to, okay, there's a short list, there's a honey-do list of things we better figure out pretty quick, and we've got the next 10 years to do it, which is what you see our species starting to do, hopefully.
I guess I'm one of the few business people here this week, and my question is, can you comment on either any work you've done or any observations regarding how nature may market itself? And beyond just, you used the example of like the pheasant and the hens. So beyond just the strutting itself, but going deeper, that if a hen is looking at, let's just an example, there's a couple of different, roosters around. Well, what's going on that decides this rooster versus that rooster, or a pack of wolves deciding to be together? We can use that as an example, if you will, marketing. So what does nature do in that regard? Any comments that you can make?
Female choice. No, it's true. It's true. It's true. What they're looking at.
I'll take you up to Madison Avenue. We'll straighten it all out there.
It's female choice. It is. I mean, a lot of it really is. And in the case of the lecking birds and all, what they're looking for, what females are looking for, is health. And really, look, those bright feathers and all. That's not like, wow, your colors are so wonderful. It's, wow, you have fewer parasites than that guy. Seriously, Yeah, I mean, it's true. It's true. It's true. And so anyway, there is a, but to tie it to marketing, I think that consumers, and I think consumers are getting a sharper and sharper authenticity meter. And I think that female choice might be spreading in our species. I mean, we're looking at things with different eyes. And I think the time is going to come when your marketing, it not only, I mean, I love this thing, but at some point it's not only going to have to be cool, but it's got to be good for me. I mean, it's got to be, I got to know the story about how its aluminum was mined, and I got to know, and you got to know what's going to happen at the end of its life. And so it's going to have to signal to me more than just a shallow, appeal to my lust, because my lust is starting to mature. What it is I desire as a consumer is I'm starting to get as sharp as those females saying, yeah, I've seen bright red, but let me see your back tail feathers. Oh, good, you have all your tail feathers. Oh, you run well too, okay. I mean, but we've done all kinds of things with because you're right, life is constantly marketing its wares. I mean, think about flowers, for goodness sakes. They need to be pollinated. So the flowers we see are only part of the issue. I mean, flowers they have landing stripes that only bees that can see in UV light see. And they're so, one of the things is the signal to antenna matching, coupling, is so exquisite because it's a very noisy environment. There are a lot of advertisements out there. And you want to be pollinated by the bee, say, that fits into your flower and will carry your your pollen. And so you, as a flower, you're in a co-evolutionary loop with your customer. And you're constantly becoming more and more able to be seen above the noise for your individual target, symbiont partner, your co-evolutionary partner. So in the natural world, a lot of these co-evolutionary loops of company with customer, we're starting to see it with things like Nike having people send back their sneakers so that Nike can get a look at them and see how they've worn or whatever, so that they can improve their product line. Or Mini Cooper allowing you to go online and customize your Mini Cooper. Cooper's in the Mini Cooper, who makes Mini Cooper? Cooper? Oh, BMW. Okay. BMW is in a co-evolutionary loop with their customer because they can look at the data then of how people customize things, But there's all kinds of things with marketing. I could go on for a long time. Yeah.
Janine, thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thanks, guys. It was fun.
Again, that was very inspirational, Janine. So before I let you go, there are buses leaving back to the Hyatt at 8:30, all the way through to 10, so feel free to enjoy our building. And tomorrow morning, they'll be bringing you back here at 6:45, 7, 7:15, and 7:30. So we'll see you here tomorrow. And if anybody has lost their Amazon Kindle, you want to read your ebooks, we found a lost Amazon Kindle in the men's room. So please come and collect it at Lost and Found. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.